They ruled for centuries and fell in days. They built cathedrals and burned cities. They married their children across continents, watched their bloodlines thin, and their empires dissolve into dust. 20 dynasties, from the courts of early modern Europe back to the first kings who called themselves Christian. This is not a history of battles alone. It is a history of power, of how it is seized, how it is held, and how, without exception, it ends. We begin at the end, and we travel back to the beginning. Henry IV of Navarre converted from Protestantism to secure the French throne in 1593. "Paris is worth a mass," he reportedly said, and he was right. His dynasty built the most powerful monarchy in Europe. Louis XIV reigned for 72 years and made Versailles proof that the king and the state were one. At their height, Bourbons sat simultaneously on the thrones of France, Spain, Naples, Sicily, and Parma. Louis XVI was guillotined in January 1793. The crowd dipped their handkerchiefs in his blood. The Spanish branch never fell. Felipe VI reigns in Madrid today. Henry VII ended the Wars of the Roses at Bosworth Field in 1485. His son Henry VIII did something stranger. When Rome refused to annul his marriage, he did not petition, he legislated. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 made the King of England the head of his own church. Elizabeth I ruled for 45 years and refused to name an heir until she was dying. 6 wives, 3 heirs. Edward died at 15. Mary died childless. Elizabeth died alone. The Tudors burned too bright to last. They never built an empire, they proliferated instead. Christian I became King of Denmark in 1448, and the dynasty held that throne without interruption for over 5 centuries. But their real achievement was the children. Christian IX of Denmark, the father-in-law of Europe, placed his sons and daughters on the thrones of Britain, Greece, and Russia. The Romanovs after Catherine the Great were technically an Oldenburg branch. They ruled Russia longer than the original Romanovs. They are still here, in Denmark, Norway, and Britain. They did not conquer Europe. They simply outlasted it. Frederick the Great invaded Silesia within months of taking the throne in 1740 and kept it. Over 4 decades, he doubled Prussia's territory and built the most feared army in Europe. In 1871, Wilhelm I was proclaimed German Emperor in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the ultimate humiliation of France. Wilhelm II dismissed Bismarck in 1890 and antagonized every major power simultaneously. He abdicated on the 9th of November 1918, 2 hours before the armistice, and fled to the Netherlands, where he spent his remaining years chopping wood. In 1386, the pagan Grand Duke of Lithuania, converted to Christianity, married the Queen of Poland, and became King Władysław II Jagiellon. The union created the largest state in Europe, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. In 1410, the combined army destroyed the Teutonic Knights at Grunwald, one of the largest battles of the medieval world. By the early 16th century, Jagiellons wore the crowns of Poland, Lithuania, Bohemia, and Hungary simultaneously. Then Mohács came. The Ottoman army crushed Hungary in 1526. The king drowned in retreat. The dynasty ran out of sons. No dynasty suffered more at the hands of its own people or its own decisions. Charles I launched the English Civil War in 1642 and was tried and executed outside the banqueting house 7 years later, the first reigning European monarch put to death by his own subjects. The monarchy was restored in 1660. James II was deposed in 1688. Queen Anne suffered 17 pregnancies and produced no surviving heir. The throne passed to Hanover. The Stuarts sent one more pretender. At Culloden, the last Jacobite charge was broken in under an hour. Charles IV was the most capable emperor of the 14th century. The Golden Bull of 1356 defined how emperors were elected for the next 400 years. He made Prague one of the great cities of Europe and collected crowns the way other men collect debts. His successor, Sigismund, burned Jan Hus at the Council of Constance in 1415, despite a promise of safe conduct. The Hussite Wars devastated Bohemia for a generation. Sigismund died in 1437 without a male heir. His titles passed intact to the Habsburgs and stayed there for 5 centuries. For 6 centuries, the Habsburgs were Europe. Their motto said it all: let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry. Charles V inherited Spain, the Americas, the Netherlands, Austria, and the imperial title, all through the mathematics of dynastic marriage. At his peak, the sun literally never set on Habsburg land. The inbreeding that built the dynasty eventually consumed it. The Spanish line died out in 1700, its last king too physically devastated to produce an heir. Karl I abdicated in 1918 and died in exile on Madeira, aged 34. The last emperor of Europe, dying on a Portuguese island. Charles of Anjou was given the Kingdom of Sicily by the Pope in 1266 as a weapon against the Hohenstaufen. He used it without mercy. He defeated Manfred of Sicily at Benevento, then had the teenage Conradin publicly beheaded in a Naples marketplace. For 1 decade, he controlled the Western Mediterranean and planned the conquest of Constantinople. Then, the Sicilian Vespers. On the 30th of March, 1282, a French soldier insulted a Sicilian woman at evening prayers. Within minutes, every Frenchman in Palermo was dead. The dream of Mediterranean dominance died at the sound of Vesper bells. They lost the great medieval struggle for the Holy Roman Empire and survived to inherit something greater. When Queen Anne of Britain died in 1714 without an heir, Parliament found George of Hanover, a German prince who barely spoke English. He became George I of Great Britain. The Welfen had inherited the most powerful throne in the world without firing a shot. In 1866, Prussia absorbed Hanover. The German branch was extinguished. In Britain, they renamed themselves Windsor in 1917 because it sounded too German. The name changed. The blood did not. Seven centuries on the Bavarian throne. They never conquered Europe, but they outlasted almost everyone who tried. The Wittelsbachs secured Bavaria in 1180. Louis IV became Holy Roman Emperor in 1328 and spent his reign in open war with the papacy. Wittelsbach princes briefly wore the crowns of Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Bohemia, and Greece. Never the most powerful dynasty in any given century, but always there. Ludwig II bankrupted the treasury on fantasy castles. Declared insane in 1886, he was found drowned in Lake Starnberg 3 days later. The last Wittelsbach king fled Munich on foot in the rain in November 1918. At their height, they ruled more of France than the French king. They gave England its common law its parliament, and its most spectacular self-destructions. Henry II's empire stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. His son John lost most of France and was forced to sign Magna Carta in 1215, the first written limit on English royal power. Edward II was murdered at Berkeley Castle. Richard II was starved to death in Pontefract after his cousin took his crown. The line fractured into Lancaster and York. The two halves spent the next century trying to destroy each other. Frederick II spoke 6 languages, wrote poetry, conducted experiments, and ruled as Holy Roman Emperor, King of Sicily, and King of Jerusalem simultaneously. A crown won through diplomacy with the Sultan of Egypt, scandalizing Christendom. His contemporaries called him Stupor Mundi, wonder of the world, and meant it as a warning. The papacy excommunicated him 4 times. He died in 1250, still fighting. Without him, the dynasty collapsed within a generation. His grandson Conradin, aged 15, led an army into Italy to reclaim the family's kingdoms. He was beheaded in a Naples marketplace. Charles of Anjou watched without expression. The most successful dynasty you have never heard of. While the Habsburgs fought for empires, the Wettens married into them, and by the 19th century, their blood ran through half the thrones of Europe. Frederick the Wise sheltered Martin Luther after the Diet of Worms in 1521. Without that decision, the Reformation ends in its infancy. Centuries later, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg married Queen Victoria. Their 9 children married into the royal families of Germany, Russia, Greece, Romania, and Denmark. George V renamed them Windsor in 1917 because it sounded too German. The blood did not change. They still reign in Britain and Belgium today. Vikings who learned French conquered England and built a kingdom in Sicily. In less than a century, the Normans left their mark on 3 civilizations simultaneously. At Hastings, on the 14th of October, 1066, William of Normandy killed a king, won a crown, and changed the English language forever. The conquest replaced the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy almost entirely and produced the Domesday Book, the most comprehensive survey of any medieval kingdom. Meanwhile, Norman adventurers seized Sicily from the Arabs, creating a kingdom where Christian, Muslim, and Greek cultures coexisted under one roof. The dynasty ended not in battle, but in biology. 19 years of civil war, then the Plantagenets. Henry III reached the summit in 1046, deposing 3 rival popes simultaneously and installing his own candidate. For one brief generation, the Holy Roman Emperor appointed the Vicar of Christ. His son Henry IV paid for it. Excommunicated in 1076, he stood barefoot in the snow outside the castle of Canossa for 3 days in January 1077, begging absolution from Pope Gregory VII, the most powerful ruler in Europe, kneeling in the cold. He received his absolution. He never recovered his authority. The last Salian died without an heir in 1125, leaving an empire diminished and a church emboldened. Hugh Capet was elected king in 987 by lords who expected a figurehead. His dynasty proved impossible to manage. Philip II Augustus doubled France's territory. Philip IV moved the Pope to Avignon like a piece on a chessboard. The Valois branch fought the 100 Years' War, lost everything, and then won it back. Henry III, the last Valois, was stabbed by a Dominican friar at Saint-Cloud on the 1st of August 1589. He died the following morning, 600 years on the French throne, ended by a single blade. On the 10th of August, 955, at the Lech River in Bavaria, Otto I faced the Magyar cavalry that had terrorized Europe for half a century. He shattered them. The Battle of Lechfeld ended the Magyar threat and made Otto the undisputed protector of Christian Europe. 7 years later, Pope John XII crowned him emperor in Rome. The Holy Roman Empire had its first true sovereign. Henry II, the last Ottonian, built monasteries and produced no heir. When he died in 1024, the throne passed peacefully to the Salians. The Ottonians lasted barely a century. The empire they built lasted 800 years after them. They didn't just rule Europe, they invented it. Charlemagne spent 46 years at war and won nearly all of them. On Christmas Day, 800, Pope Leo III placed a crown on his head in St. Peter's Basilica. The Western Roman Empire, dead for 3 centuries, had returned. From the Pyrenees to the Elbe, from the North Sea to Rome, no European matched it for 1,000 years. His grandson split the empire at Verdun in 843. Viking raids and Magyar invasions picked the fragments clean. The last Carolingian king died in 987, falling from a horse. No heir. What remained was the memory. Clovis I unified the Frankish tribes, crushed the last Roman governor of Gaul at Soissons in 486, and made the most consequential political decision of the early Middle Ages. He converted to Christianity in 496. Not the heresy favored by rival Germanic kings, but Roman orthodoxy. The church became his ally. Every conquest was now a crusade. The later Merovingians, the do-nothing kings, ruled in name only while mayors of the palace held the real power. In 751, Pepin the Short asked Rome who deserved to be king. Rome answered. Childeric III was deposed, his head shaved, sent to a monastery. Everything that came after began here.